Welcome back to Lecture 3 of Western Civilization, picking up right where we left off with the death of, or murder possibly, of Akhenaten, who used to be known as Amenhotep IV, and now the ascension of his son, King Tut. And so, King Tut, again, like we said, was originally Tutankhamun, and then eventually changed his name to Tutankhamun, or Khamun, depending on how you want to pronounce it or spell it. And he is commonly known today, as most people say it, because they can't pronounce these words, as just King Tut. And so he ruled only a very short time, but let's take a look at a couple things that I took pictures of a few years ago in France. These were actually at a museum in France, at a special exhibit, and they were actually his sarcophagus. And it was kind of like one of those little Russian nesting dolls, or like a bunch of Easter eggs that have like little packages, or like maybe a birthday present, that gag where you have a big box and then another box and another box inside, etc., until you get to the present, which is really small in the middle. Like that. But this one's gold, and you can see again how big it is next to that woman. Giant gold one. This picture unfortunately didn't come out well. But King Tut was, again, from the 18th dynasty. He lived roughly ruled from 1332 B.C.E. to 1323 B.C.E. He, of course, inside this gold one, which I had in the previous picture, was this, okay, this marble, red marble sarcophagi. Inside that was this one, made of gold, again. Inside this one was this one, with small jewels and ceramic plates, as well as more gold and things on it. As we open this one, you would have found this on top of here, okay? And if we scope round in on the side, closer, you can actually see where he would have been right there, okay? This would have been the top part of that, and this was a blanket around it, and of course they've put, they want to make sure that the mummy inside does not have any corrosion or anything from oxygen in the air, so it's kind of sealed in this plastic box, okay? As well as protect it from people touching it. So, of course, he was mummified, okay, like all pharaohs and all Egyptian pharaohs at the time, and even some other Egyptians which were mummified. King Tut died about 18 years old in the year 1323 B.C.E. Unknown reason of death, which is very interesting because records back then were pretty good on what they thought people died of. And we're not exactly sure what happened to him. After, of course, opening up his sarcophagus and everything in the 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s, we have found and examined it with, of course, X-rays, as opposed to anything else. And we found a couple different things. One, there was a skull fracture, and this is actually a picture of his X-ray from his head. There was a skull fracture, so maybe he fell and had a skull fracture kill him. We're not exactly sure. There could have been also a chest injury. And the reason why we say a chest injury is because his heart is not in his mummified remains, okay? They found that his heart is not in there with the X-rays and everything they've done to inspect the body. When you are mummified, you're kind of dried out and everything, and the organs are removed and dried out and then put back, for the most part. For some reason, his heart was not, which is very, very unusual for mummification, again, especially of a king or something like that, or of a pharaoh, or king, same word. And so it's very interesting that his heart was not replaced in it. Instead, where the heart should have been is an engraved scarab beetle, okay? A scarab beetle. Now, this scarab is quite large, okay, this bug. It's kind of like jeweled. And this is what it would have looked like, okay? Kind of like that on one side, like the shell, okay, and the little mouth and stuff like that, and the wings of the shell. And then on the bottom side, this writing, Okay? And the writing, don't worry about what it says, but it says a couple things, kind of prayer and stuff on there. But it's very interesting that his heart is not in there, and it's been replaced instead by a scarab beetle, this engraved scarab beetle. Which again is very strange for what normally happens with mummies. Usually their heart is there, everything is there, and the engraving is all on the sarcophagus and the other shells of the sarcophagi, right? All of these. If you look here, there is some writing on here, as well as patterns. And on this one, no real writing except for along the top area. But on the gold one, tons and tons of writing, which you can see again on this picture right here. Tons of writing here, because this is the same as that one, okay? So yeah, I mean, that was, of course, found inside his pyramid, okay, or his tomb in the pyramid. And so that is King Tut. He's about the only one that we're really going to mention in depth. Otherwise, other than Akhenaten, we will mention another one in just a little bit, but only briefly, okay? The Hittites and the Kassites. Let's start talking about them. They are important. They're not Egyptians, but they run into the Egyptians, okay? They are, the Hittites and Kassites, mostly up here, okay? And the Kassites kind of end up blending into this area. So let's talk about the... they both popped up around circa 1600 BCE to the year 1200 BCE. And if you add 2020, okay, because the year we are in, to that, it's about, 3,620 years ago to 3,220 years ago is when they lived, okay? And remember, BCE, I know it's a little tricky getting that. It's counting backwards, okay, which is why the numbers go in reverse. It's counting down to the year 1. BCE, and then right immediately after that, the next year is not 0, it goes to 1 CE, okay? I know a couple of you are having trouble with that, and that's okay. It's a tricky thing to understand for some people when you're not used to it. So, on to the Kassites. The Kassites moved into Mesopotamia. Remember, Mesopotamia is right here. We've been talking about Egypt with the Nile River here, okay? And here's Europe. Okay? And so Mesopotamia with the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers with the Sumerians, remember the Sumerians, we talked about them, and the Babylonians, or the Old Babylonians, which were what? The Akkad, basically. The Amorites and the Akkadians in this area as well. Well, we're talking about the Kassites, which move into this area as well. Okay? And so they peacefully blended with the existing culture. In fact, we almost knew nothing of the Kassites. There was hardly any writing or anything of them for a very long time, until about 100 years ago, a little less even. In the past about 80 to 100 years, we've actually been digging up a lot in Sumeria, in ancient Sumeria, and finding more excavations and stuff. And we've actually found information about these people called the Kassites. And they just kind of migrated from wherever else, we don't know, to Sumeria, and were happy to blend into the culture. They were like, hi, we want to live with you. And the Sumerians were like, okay. And so it was very peaceful, nice blending of culture. And you see a little bit of change with the Sumerian culture in that period, around 1600 to 1200. But you really don't have it like being completely influenced by the Kassites. So we don't still know what the Kassites were on their own. Okay? Now the Hittites are a completely different story. Completely different story. These guys. They lived right here, up in an area called Asia Minor. Asia Minor. Asia Minor is this area, okay, which is the present-day nation of Turkey, okay? They're in present-day Turkey. Turkey is this huge area right here, okay? Of course, this is the Middle East, right? Syria, Palestine, or Jerusalem area now, or Israel, rather. And then Egypt, Saudi Arabia, this would be Iraq, Iran. Here's Egypt. Greece here, the rest of Europe here, Russia's up here. This is Turkey, okay? Turkey. But it will be commonly referenced in this class going forward, and I'll talk about it a lot, as Asia Minor, okay? Because that is what it is called. It's a very mountainous, rocky area, and I've got a good map of that in a minute. Asia Minor had a lot of natural resources. A ton. specifically two more than anything else: silver and iron. Silver, really important, really good for trading, right? Really pretty, just like gold, okay? People were like, yeah, I want that. Again, they didn't have money, okay? They used trade, and they would trade for, like, really pretty materials and stuff like that. Even though they weren't buying, they were trading. Iron was the other one, and iron's very important, right? Iron is much harder than even bronze or copper, okay? Definitely harder than copper by itself, but harder than bronze. So it's really good to use for weapons and armor and other items. But unfortunately, iron needs very high temperatures to melt it. And if you're going to melt it, that's the only way to be able to make it into anything. You have to melt metal before you can make it into something else, right? Okay? Even if you just melt it into a very thin sheet or something like that and then carve or do something with it after that or sculpt it some other way. But you still have to melt it. And it requires extremely high temperatures. Much higher than like lead or copper and bronze are needed to melt, okay, to make into things. So iron was very rare to be used because people just couldn't get ovens hot enough or fire hot enough to melt the iron most of the time, okay? It was a technology barrier. So it wasn't used much. The Hittites, however, despite that, having these natural resources, they were very aggressive, okay? They likely took over the Mitanni people, which lived in this area. They used horses and chariots, much like the Hyksos that attacked Egypt that we talked about last time. And they took over not only their starting area here, but they started spreading out in all of this area, okay? All of this area is where they started taking over, which was present-day country of Turkey, okay? Lebanon, which is roughly around this area as well, and Syria, which is also around there, as well as stretching into northern Mesopotamia, right here, between the rivers. And a better map is right here. This is the extent of the Hittites at one point, although they did get a little bit further at one point before retracting out of Sumeria. So here's the Euphrates River, the Tigris River would be here, so this would be Mesopotamia. They did get into it a little bit, as you can see. So this is a bigger picture of the map of Asia Minor, and then Greece would be here, okay? And then this is Egypt. Well, obviously, they came into conflict with the Egyptians because they started going down along the coast into Lebanon and Syria area, right? Not just this way. But once they got down to here, Egypt at that point, during the New Kingdom, okay, had stretched up, remember? And so we end up, if we scope back out, Egypt is kind of going up to here, the Hittites are going into here, and so that is the big issue. And we're going to talk about a conflict with that in a little bit. The Hittites, we do know that they had a legal system. They had a system of laws, and it was based on compensation. Meaning that if I did something to you, I would have to pay. If I was found guilty, I would have to pay you back somehow. Okay, if I did a crime to you or stole something from you, I would have to pay you back an amount that I hurt you by, or an amount that I stole from you, or something like that. Okay? Like, say I accidentally take my chariot riding one day, and I run over your pet goat, or something like that. I would have to pay you for your pet goat. Whether I'm giving you some kind of, like, amount of food, or not necessarily money, again, because they didn't have money back then. They did have, like, trade or something, or maybe I have to buy you a new goat. Something like that. I would have to give you something to compensate you for your loss. So a legal system based on that. Which is kind of what kind of sticks with legal systems in general, okay, right? It's some kind of compensation, usually, or punishment based on a crime. Worshipping, for religion-wise, they were kind of monotheistic, mostly. They worshipped a sky god. We don't know much details other than that. There's not really much to say about it other than that. So really that's about it on the sky god. But it was a sky god, a deity that they thought lived in the sky. Okay? Writing style, they actually adopted both cuneiform from Mesopotamia, as well as hieroglyphs from the Egyptians, which is very interesting that they were using both at the same time. And cuneiform, if you remember, is very similar to hieroglyphs in that it first was originally a picture meant a word, and then a picture meant maybe an idea with that associated with that word, or letters or consonants or something like that, or part of a word. And so hieroglyphs is also at that same time kind of going into that period as well. We do know that they spoke an Indo-European language. Now, this is not a written language, this is a spoken language, okay? And so what are Indo-European languages? Right here. Here's a pretty good example of a bunch of different Indo-European languages. So we've got English, which I'm looking for right here. Old English is pretty close here. There's English elsewhere, but we know it right here as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 100. So it's numbers 1 through 10 and 100 in the various languages of this Indo-European language group. Okay? And you've got Irish, which have different letters, Greek, Latin, Italian, Spanish. Maybe many of you took Spanish in high school, or maybe in school now you're taking Spanish or French, or maybe even German. People took those in high school as well, Latin as well at some high schools. And so this is just numbers 1 through 10, and you can kind of look at them across the board, and some of them are very similar, okay? And that's because they're all part of the same Indo-European language. Now, what's more of an Indo-European language other than these numbers? Right here. So, originally, Indo-European languages started right around here, okay? Right here on the map of the world, okay? And today, anywhere that is in blue on this map speaks a Indo-European language. And anything that speaks a Uralic language, U-R-A-L-I-C, here, are in these blue areas. Much less, right? And then there's other languages like Africa, the Middle East, some of it, and China, etc., that speak different languages today. But for the most part, the Indo-European languages are anything that's blue on this map, which is a huge portion of the world today, right? And it's all because language started with one language originally and kind of started spreading out to different groups. And different groups of people started coming up with their own words and their own letters and names for different things. And they might have been closely related language-wise, but maybe it was slightly different. So a good example is one, the word one, okay, the number 1. In Welsh, it's un. In Italian, it's uno. In Spanish, it's uno. In French, it's un. In Dutch, it's in. Okay? And tons of other languages that are all here. It's very similar. The spoken word is similar, or the written version is similar. Okay? And so you can kind of see how it just kind of starts branching out, where eventually you end up having these groups where they end up splitting off into different groups. Like German, English. They broke off from an original version of German. Spanish and Portuguese, they're very close. Same with Italian, they're very close. And they all broke off from basically Latin, or Romance languages as they're called, okay, which came out of Rome and Greece, okay, and Greece is down here, Greek. And so you've got all these different languages. Russian over here, with a bunch of other different ones, like Polish, and things like that, Ukrainian. You've heard of these nations probably in the news, and things like that, and in books. And they all are on the map geographically around each other. Same with these. Germany and England, they're separated by some water, but they're not too far. And it's because the people migrated from one to the other, okay? And so an Indo-European language group is these two main branches. Indo-European here, and you get Indo this way, European this way. Whether it was either in Europe or more like India, okay? And so Indo develops into Persian, which is spoken in the Middle East, Hindi, which is spoken in India, and Bengali, which is spoken at a country called Bengal, which is right near India, okay? And a bunch more, okay? Any of these ones are the Indo side. While the European side is over here, and you've got Spanish, German, English, Italian, French, and Russian, and so many more. Like each of these little bushels or the parts of the leaves of the tree are all the different languages, right? It's incredible on how many different languages broke off from what originated right here. And then others broke off on their own here, okay? And then even more for those that were, say China and parts of Asia and Africa, okay? Broke off on their own groups, which are different, separated by much bigger differences than these ones here, which are kind of similar, okay? So that's all I wanted to really talk about the Indo-European language group, but it's something that's interesting. If you like languages, I definitely encourage you to look more into it. It's very interesting. There's some good videos. I might even link one day on there. It'll just be just for fun. You don't have to watch it if you don't want, okay? If I even do so. Let's go back to Egypt and the Hittites. Remember I said that the Hittites and the Egyptians were going to run into each other? Because right here, they're running into each other. Well, they run into each other quite a lot, to the point where the Hittites and the Egyptians end up having war after war all the way down the coast of Syria and everything down to Egypt itself. Okay, so if we go to the map, they have fights all along here, and we're going to be talking about this area right here. Okay, right here is where we're going. So, that battle is the Battle of Kadesh, okay, where King or Pharaoh Ramses II, 2 1s means 2, okay, Ramses II of Egypt is the Pharaoh, he's the Pharaoh and leader of Egypt, fights against Muwatalli II, okay, of the Hittites, the king of the Hittites versus Ramses II of the Egyptians, okay. Now, are they going to fight in hand-to-hand combat themselves? No. They're going to be at the back of this battle, watching it, okay? They're going to have other soldiers fighting this fight for them. And this takes place in the year 1274 B.C.E., okay? About 3,290 years ago, okay? And it was a chariot battle. Remember those chariots, those 2-wheeled chariots that the Hyksos had? Well, now the Egyptians, after they defeated the Hyksos, they started making their own. The Hittites made their own. Remember on the Hittite slide, we talked about tons of chariots for them. And so that's what we've got. Hittites fighting Egyptians on chariots, about 5,000 to 6,000 chariots total. Okay, about 3,000 a side almost. Okay, it's the largest ever chariot battle, is what this battle is known as, the Battle of Kadesh, and it's fought right here on that Sinai Peninsula right next to Egypt. And here's the Red Sea. Okay, it's the first record of battle tactics ever being used. And what are battle tactics? Well, these are battle tactics, okay, where we know where the armies sent their certain chariots or parts of the armies, okay? Now, yes, other people were fighting on foot, but the majority of the people were fighting on chariots. And again, about 5,000 to 6,000 chariots total at this battle, about 2,000 to 3,000 aside. And as you can see, these big arrows showing which way the chariots went from which army, okay? If they were green or if they were gray or yellow, depending on the army, okay? And so that is what the battle is, and you've got this big hill here, which the Hittite army kind of ran around and attacked here, and then they attacked back this way as the Egyptians kind of went off that way too. They would have been wielding bows and arrows, the composite bow. They would have been riding their chariots, and they would have been swinging, the Egyptians anyway, would have been swinging swords very similar to this. This is a khopesh. It's the Egyptian name for an Egyptian sword is a khopesh, okay? And this would have been the blade. This was where you would have held the weapon. Well, not so important, this battle in general, as a battle itself. Like, yes, the battle was pretty major, but we don't know who won. It's very interesting. We don't actually know who won this battle, okay? But we do know what happened after the battle. What happened after the battle is what's the important part for this class. And that is the Kadesh Peace Treaty, signed a few years later, okay? Almost 20 years later. Remember, 1274, and now it's 1258 to 59, okay? So, almost 20 full years later, almost, or about 14. Plus years later. The treaty is right here. This is what it looks like. This was one surviving copy. There are a couple other surviving copies that are even worse state than this, but you can see all the writing on it. The rest of the clay writing have broken off. All of the writing versions that were papyrus no longer exist for whatever reason. Maybe it wasn't written down on papyrus. We don't know. But this stone version right here is written in cuneiform, and it's written in 2 different languages. It's a bilingual peace treaty. Bilingual meaning 2 languages, okay? And it's the first ever known peace treaty written in 2 languages. And today, treaties are signed in 2 languages all the time. If we were to get into a war with someone like Russia or China, and we were to have finally a peace treaty at the end of it, it would be written in either Russian or Chinese, and then English, right? Because Americans speak English. And so that's what it would be signed in. It would be signed in 2 different languages, okay, and written in 2 different languages. The same thing, just copied in a different language. And so that's exactly what this peace treaty is. It's a bilingual peace treaty. And what are the 2 languages? Well, Hittite, right, and Egyptian. And it would have been written in cuneiform version of each, okay? And so Ramses and Muwatalli II, they both signed it, okay? They both wrote their name on it and agreed to these, to the peace treaty terms. And the peace treaty's terms were extradition, meaning, so if a, say a criminal escapes from Egypt, okay, and is a murderer or something like that, and he runs to the Hittites, and to live in the Hittites, we could, the Egyptians could say, hey, we want that guy back, okay? And same with the Hittite. If a Hittite criminal went to Egypt, the Hittites could be like, we want that guy on trial, and the Egyptians would be like, yes, we do that. And so that's very important today. We have extradition treaties with countries all over the world today. But some countries, some in South America, some elsewhere, are like perfect places where criminals want to go from our country because we don't have these treaties with them today, okay? So if you ever hear of extradition, that's what that means. Prisoner exchange, which means during their war. Remember, the battle took place in 74, and now we're roughly the year 60, so about 49 years later, in 58, or 14 years later, sorry, prisoners were taken in the war. And they would just be like, okay, well, you've got prisoners of ours, we've got prisoners of yours, let's bring them back home to each other. Trade was set up because both countries realized they had been fighting each other for so long, there was no point keeping this war going, and let's have trade now. We've got military aid going on, where both of them would decide if an enemy from another country attacked them, that they would work together against that single enemy. And then the last part of the treaty was very interesting. It was the succession of a new Hittite king, Hatsuli III, because Muwatalli II was getting old and he wanted a specific one of his sons, he had multiple sons, that wanted to be king. And he wanted a specific son, usually the oldest one, to be king. And he needed to make sure that the younger brother or the older brother wasn't going to kill that brother. Okay? So the Egyptians said, yes, when you die, we are going to make sure that Hatsuli III will become king as opposed to this other guy, this other brother. And that Hatsuli III understood that he was, helped by the Egyptians and that the peace treaty would continue afterwards. And so that's why Ramses agreed to that term, to make sure that peace would continue. So, we've been talking a lot about Bronze Age civilizations. As you can see, we've been talking about this area, and this area specifically. But all of these green and silver spots are where Bronze Age civilizations do pop up. Okay? All of the green areas are where copper is found. Okay? All of the silver little symbols are where tin is found. And remember, you need 90% copper, 10% tin to make bronze. And so that's why you end up having these civilizations where they were. And there was a little bit of tin found in a couple places here, but not as much. So getting copper or getting the bronze made in this area was a bit difficult. You had to ship copper or the tin to there. Moving on, let's talk about a Bronze Age civilization or Bronze Age construction area called Stonehenge, which is going to be right up here in England, in Europe. Okay? So, Stonehenge. You may have seen pictures of Stonehenge, probably tons of times maybe, okay? It is in present-day southwest England, okay? Its construction lasted about 1,500 years. It took 1,500 years to get these stones the way they are today, okay, and to get them there, as well as also previous smaller stone things there, which we'll talk about in just a moment, okay? And so I will talk about that in the next video.